We continue now at the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 8a. In the Mishnah it said that they bring the Sotah up to the eastern gate. And the Gemara now asks, what do you mean they bring her to the eastern gate? Hasam Kaima, she was already over there at the eastern gate. Rashi says, Hasam Kaima b'lishkas hagazah, she was at the lishkas hagazah. Kedukamer sheyaimu aleh bezin hagadol. That's the area where the bezin hagadol was. B'lishkas hagazah ba'azara haisa chetzia b'kodesh v'chetzia b'chol. The lishkas hagazah was in the azara. Half of it was in the kodesh, half of it was in the chol. Kedamar b'yuma perak sheni. That's what it says in the second parak of Yuma. And the Gemara answers, Demaskinan lo umachtinan lo. We bring her up and we bring her down. We make her move around a lot. Kedei liyag, and the reason is we want to wear her out in order to get a confession. The Tanya, the Gemara says, as we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Bezin masiyan eso edim mimakom lamakom. This is similar. The Bezin would make the edim move around from place to place, Kedei shetitoref daitan alein, so that they would get confused. V'yachzru behen, and that way they would retract. Rashi says, after they try to scare her, so then they bring her down from Harabayis, again in order to wear her out. So that way again, she's going to get worried about drinking the waters, and she will admit. Masiyan hayu eso edim shem edim edus nefashos, talking specifically about edim who are testifying in capital cases. That's what we're trying to get, that they should retract their testimony. Ucheshabodkin osan hayu masiyan osan mipina lepina milishka lelishka. When they would ask them questions and interrogate them, they would make them move from place to place for the same basic reason. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Shesham mashkenes hasotos v'chulu. It said this area by the eastern gate is the place where they give the sotos to drink, and it's also the place where the mitzoraim come, and it's also the place where the women who gave birth come. And the Gemara says, Bishlama sotos, I understand by sotos. T'chsiv, that's written in the pasuk. The pasuk says, V'hamid hakohen eso isha lifnei Hashem. It says the Kohen stands her up lifnei Hashem. And Rashi says, Lifnei Hashem, v'hu ha'pesach shabo derech kanisa. That eastern gate, that is the entryway, v'yetzi l'chol boyazar. That's considered Lifnei Hashem. That's the way that everybody enters to the Azara. So again, that comes from the pasuk. Mitzorah nami dichsib. By Mitzorah also, the pasuk says v'hemid hakohen hamitayr v'gomer, and again that pasuk also goes on to say Lifnei Hashem. So both are in the psukim. Ela Yoled is my time, but when it comes to Yoledis, a woman who's given birth, what's the reason why they're by that eastern gate? Ileima mishum da'asyan v'kaiman ha'korbanayu. Now, if you're going to say the reason is because they have to stand over their carbon. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, in karbana shaladam karev elim kein omed al gabav. The halach is a carbon cannot be brought for a person unless he's standing over the carbon. So the Gemara says, but if that's the case, if so, zavin v'zavos nami, the same should not only be by a Yoledis, it should be true by a zav and a zava as well. And the Gemara says, enochinami, indeed that is the case. The Tana was just choosing one of those, but the same halacha that applies by Yoledis would apply by Zav and Zava as well. Rashi says, "Korbanayo kishamakrivam as karban kineim litaram." It's talking about when they're bringing the nests, the birds that they bring as their karbanos by the Yoledis. Ba'achilas kachim u'mitzvah al ha'adam sheyamod v'yishmar al karbano. So there's a mitzvah by a person that they should stand and be present by the bringing of the carbon. V'nafkalon b'sifri, we learn this out in the Sifri, mitishmru l'hakriv li b'ma'ado from the pasuk. U'misha yachol likonis ba'azara. Now, if somebody's able when they bring the carbon to enter the azara, so nichnas, so then they enter the azara, there's no issue. Ve'elu, however, in these cases, we're talking about people that need purification. They're what we call mechusrei kapar. They still have to bring their carbon. That's the final step of the purification. So ve'elu shelo hayu yecholos v'nei shayim mechusaras kapar. Here you have a situation of people who are mechusrei kapar. They're not completely pure. So omdos bechalal shar nikanor shelo niskadish. So again, they stand by this open area of the gate of Nikanor, which doesn't have the kedusha. This is as we mentioned earlier. Zavin v'zavos nami, and the Gemara said if that's the case, it should be true by zav and zava. Kishemakriven karbanehem, when they bring their karbanos, hein mechusare kapara, they're mechusare kapara ve'enan yecholin likanis, and therefore they're not able to enter. And the Gemara said indeed that is the case by zav and zava as well. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, ein mashkin shtei sotos ka'achas. We don't give to drink two sotas at one time. In order that the woman shouldn't feel comfortable that her friend is doing the same thing. Again, it's going to embolden her if it's happening together with another sota. Rashi says, Shelo yehi liba gas bechaverta shema ha'achas omedes al buria ve'ena moda lomar tmeya ani v'chaverta shi tmeya roa ezu she'ena moda v'sovelas es bushta v'liba misgaver le'alasos kemozu ve'ena moda. In other words, one of them is going to stand and she's not going to admit. She's going to declare her innocence. And so now the other friend, who really is defiled and she really isn't innocent, but she's going to see the other one is not admitting, and so therefore she also will continue and she won't admit. That's what we're afraid of, and so therefore that's why the Tanna Kama says, in order that she shouldn't be too comfortable, we don't want to have two at once. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lomin Hashem Huzeh. This is not the reason. There's a different reason why you can't do two sotas at once. The reason really comes from a pasuk. It says Osa, it says her, and we understand from the pasuk Levada, she has to be alone. There can't be another sota. And Rashi says, Lomin Hashem Huzeh Lo Zeu Atam Shamar Tohekar Hanemar B'Davar. That's not the reason. It's really because Osa, it says Osa V'Yishbia Osa HaKohen. It says V'Yishbia Osa HaKohen, and we learn it out from the pasuk. And the Gemara says V'Tanakama Haksiv Osa, but according to the Tanakama, isn't that true? Doesn't it say Osa? Why is the Tanakama giving this other reason? And the Gemara answers Tanakama Rabbi Shimoni. The Tanakama actually is Rabbi Shimon, the Darish Tam Dekra. Rabbi Shimon in general holds that when a pasuk can say something, but we can darsh and we can try to understand what the reason is for the pasuk. And when the Tanakama says Kedei sheyehei liba gas bechaverta, that's really the reason behind the pasuk. Umatam kamar, the Tanakama is giving the reason. What is the reason? Is what the Tanakama is saying. Matam osa levada. What is the reason why the pasuk says osa, that she has to be alone? Kedei shelo yehei liba gas bechaverta. It's in order that she shouldn't be too comfortable with her friend there. And the Gemara says, "My beinayu." So what's the difference between these two opinions, between the Tanakama, which we have now identified as Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda? Rashi says, "My beinayu bein Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon imishum liba gaspa v'imishum gezeres hakosov." What difference does it make if the reason is just that it's a straight gezeres hakosov, or if the reason is there's a reason behind the pasuk that's because she's going to be too comfortable? And the Gemara says, "Ika beinayu." There's a difference between the two shitas rosasas. Let's say you have a woman who is trembling with fear, so there it's not going to be an issue that she'll be comfortable. She clearly is not comfortable. Rashi says, "Ika beinayu isha shanu roem bashi rosasas." Let's say there's a woman and we see that she's trembling. Me'emas hamayim, she fears the waters. Ve'ena moded, she's not admitting. Laman damar shelo yehei liba gasba. So if you're going to say that she can't be with another sota, so she shouldn't get too comfortable. Zu anu roen she'in liba gasba. Here we see she's not comfortable. Ulaman delo darish time with the crab, but the one who says that we don't darshan the reason for the pasuk, alexeris hakosov, it's just exeris hakosov, ein mashkinim acheres. So then we wouldn't say that she drinks together with somebody else. And so that is the nafkamina between the shita of Rabbi Shimon and the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. But the Gemara says, "V'rosasas mi mashkin." But even if she's trembling, would we really go ahead and give two sotas together? Rashi says, "V'rosasas mi mashkin imo acheres." Would we do something? Would we do another sota together with her just because she's trembling? Nihidain li bagaspa. Granted, let's say it's true that she's not comfortable. Ha'ika mishum asiyas mitzvahs chavilas. There's another reason not to do it together. There's a principle we're not supposed to do mitzvahs together in bundles. Keretani, as we learned in the following brisa, as the Gemara is about to quote again, "V'rosasas mi mashkin." Is it really true by someone that is trembling? Would it really be true that we would give them together? Va'ainos and mitzvahs chavilas. But there's a principle that we don't do mitzvahs chavilas. And the Mesoras Hashas changes the Detnan to Detanya. Detanya, as we learned in a brisa, this is the same girsa that Rashi had. Detanya, as we learned in a brisa, ein mashkin shtei sotos ka'achas. You're not allowed to give two sotas to drink at once. And furthermore, ve'ein metarin shtei mitzoroin ka'achas. You can't purify two lepers at once. Ve'ein rotzin shnei avadim ka'achas. You can't pierce two slaves at once. Ve'ein orphan shtei agolas ka'achas. You can't break the necks of two calves at once. That's talking about the mitzvah of egla arufa. Why can't you do all of these things together? Lefisha ein osin mitzvahs chavilas. The reason is because you're not supposed to do mitzvahs in bundles, and so therefore that's another reason why we shouldn't be able to do two sotas together. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya v'yitemer Rav Kahana. Abaya says, and some people say Rav Kahana says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'kohen echad, kan b'shnei kohanim. Here we're talking about with one kohen. That's a problem of doing it in bundles. But if you have two different kohanim with the two sotas, so then it would not be a problem of chavilos. And Rashi says chavilos, you shouldn't do it in bundles. What's the reason for that? Shanira kemisha hayu olav lamasui umemar lefarik maso. When a person does mitzvahs all together, it looks like the mitzvahs are a burden to him, and he's trying to get rid of the mitzvahs as fast as he can. Bekohen echad, with one kohen have chavilos. And again, the Gemara finally answered, if it's one kohen that's doing it in bundles. The same would be true, let's say, by slaves, piercing the slaves, bebezin echad over other echad. If you do it in one bezin, one master, then it's a problem of chavilos. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'hakohen oches bivgodah." It said the kohen grabs her clothing and tears them off. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ufaras Rosha Isha. It says that he uncovers the head of the woman. Ein li ela Rosha. I only know that he uncovers her head. Gufa minayin. How do we know he uncovers her body? Talmud Lomar Ha'isha. The pasuk says Ha'isha. Could have just said he uncovers her head. It says Rosha Isha. It indicates her body as well. Imkein ma Talmud Lomar Ufaras Rosha. Now, if it already says he uncovers the woman, why does it have to say he uncovers her head? Isn't that included in uncovering her as a whole? And the Gemara answers to that, Melamed she'hakohen soser esara. This teaches us that the Kohen not only uncovers her head, but he also undoes the braids of her hair. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer im haya liba v'chulu. Rabbi Yehuda said, if the woman is attractive, so then we do not uncover her. This is talking about the Sotah. And the Gemara says, L'meimer de Rabbi Yehuda chayesh liherhura for Rabbanan lo chayeshi. Does this mean to say that Rabbi Yehuda, he's concerned with improper thoughts of the people who are watching, and the Rabbanan are not concerned? That's why Rabbi Yehuda says she shouldn't be uncovered, and the Rabbanan don't seem to have that concern. But we see the exact opposite in the following brisa. The Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, and this brisa is talking about someone who's being stoned. The halach is that they're stoned without their clothing on. So it says in the brisa, ha'ish mechaseno so perak echad milafanav, by a man if he's being stoned, so they cover him up with one small piece of cloth in the front to cover his private area. Va'isha shnei prakim, and the woman, by the woman there's two cloths, echad milfanav v'echad milachareh, one covers in the front and one covers in the back. Mimnei shakula erva, because by a woman, both sides, it's all considered erva. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And so you see from this brisa that Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned. He allows these individuals to be stoned naked. The Chachamim say, no, ha'ish niskalarim, a man can be stoned when he's not wearing clothing. Ve'ein ha'isha niskelas aruma, but a woman is not able to be stoned when she's not wearing clothing, because the Chachamim are concerned with the improper thoughts of those who are watching. And again, that's a contradiction, because it was the Rabbanan by our Mishnah, they were not concerned by the Sotah. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabba says, Hacha taimamai here. What is the reason? The reason is because she might end up leaving innocent. In other words, she'll still be alive at the end of this whole process. And now, therefore, there really is a concern. That's why Rabbi Yehuda is concerned. And therefore, the young Kohanim who have seen her, their Yetzer Hara will be activated because of what occurred. And again, that's why Rabbi Yehuda is concerned. But over there, in a case where a person is being stoned, Hamistalka, she's going to leave this world anyway, and so there is no concern. So that's why, again, Rabbi Yehuda says there's no concern in the case of stoning, even though Rabbi Yehuda is concerned by the Sotah. But the Gemara continues, v'chitema. Now, if you're going to say there should still be a concern by the case of stoning, because because maybe the people who are watching the process, so she has died, this woman has been put to death, but they'll still be attracted, so to speak, to other women because of this incident. But Rava said, Gemiri, it's understood, it's learned as a tradition, the ein Yetzer Hara sholeit ela b'masha ein of ros. The Yetzer Hara only rules over a person in terms of what he saw, and so therefore the Yetzer Hara would really only be for the particular woman who's being stoned. And again, she's already going to be dead, and therefore there is no concern, according to Rabbi Yehuda, by the case of stoning. And so the Gemara has answered the contradiction with regards to Rabbi Yehuda, essentially the answer being that the Sotah is going to remain alive, or possibly will remain alive, and that's not true by stoning. But the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda kasha. It's a question, it's a contradiction on Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan lo kasha, and there was no difficulty by the Rabbanan. We still haven't answered the other contradiction, because there's a contradiction within the Shita of the Rabbanan. By a Sotah, the Rabbanan don't seem to be concerned with improper thoughts, and when it comes to the case of stoning, they are concerned. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kidushanin. The contradiction with Rabbi Yehuda, that's not difficult with the answer that we gave. That answer is accurate, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.